Cameron Sutton is gone. Patrick Peterson is in. What does that mean? What are the contract details? All that and more right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. It's going to be a great episode. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app and especially on YouTube. Like this video if you see it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today, we are joined by Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, this was a crazy start to free agency for the Steelers. Cameron Sutton, a person that, we were thinking maybe there was a deal lining up. There was some mutual interest. At least that's what Omar said back at the Combine. He's gone. He's making $33 million over 3 years for the Detroit Lions. And in comes Patrick Peterson, who, if you had told Steelers fans this maybe back in 2016, they'd be jumping for joy. But right now, for the guy who's going to be 33 at the start of next season, there's some concern for that. Is this a good move or a bad move for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Alan Saunders?
I think the first thing is, this just proves that none of us know anything.
Nope,
right?
We don't.
As
much as we say we do.
I don't know. I must have talked about 50 free agents before the start of the contact period on Monday.
Patrick Peterson.
I'm 100% positive that Patrick Peterson's name did not come up at any point. This completely goes against the Steelers type, the way they've done business before. When they sign free agents, they want younger guys. Patrick Peterson's going to be 33. It's just not who they are, not who they have been at all. I think it's a first real sign that things are going to be pretty different under Omar. And I think this is different in a good way. It is certainly not the Steelers' usual MO, but I think Patrick Peterson can play. I actually think his season in 2022 is extremely underrated. If you look at his numbers, very, very good. 5 interceptions, 15 passes defended, played all 17 games, has been extremely healthy, even though he's up there in age. Probably a better zone corner than a man corner at this time and point in his career. But, I think you can live with that. I think he's a good fit for the Steelers defense. He'll be a great mentor for young corners that I anticipate them to bring in. And it's a cheap deal. They're paying him an average of $7 million a season over 2 years. I don't really see a lot not to like about this deal, except if you compare it to having Cam Sutton for, I don't know. I think that'll be something that probably throughout the course of this year we'll wonder about. Is an extra $4 million this year and $4 million next year? Is that worth it to have Cam Sutton instead of Patrick Peterson? I don't think anybody knows right now, but I think the Steelers did pretty good on this exchange.
I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out because when I look at the Steelers, like you said, over time, the Steelers have just been an organization that's been about, if they're bringing in a vet, he's in his late 20s at the latest. This is very much breaking the brand of what the Steelers have been. But I also wonder, do you see this as reactionary to Cam Sutton leaving? And as far as, we just got to go out and get somebody else, and this is a good veteran. Because to me, one of the biggest things about Cameron Sutton, if he would have stayed with the Steelers, wasn't just his talent as a guy who could play on the outside and the inside, but also his leadership as far as being a veteran who's played in the NFL for several years. And if they were going to draft a young cornerback, you wanted him to have a wily veteran to show him the ropes, to show what it's like week to week in the NFL. And Patrick Peterson, that's as wily veteran as you get right now when it comes to signing guys, an 8-time Pro Bowler who's been in the NFL. And he says he wants to retire a Steeler now because he's only going to play 2 more years in the NFL. Is that was this reactionary? And do you think that the leadership component played as much of a role as the talent component?
I don't have any reason not to believe Omar Khan when he told us that signing Cam Sutton was a priority for them. I believe that he wanted to. I believe that they tried. My gut feeling is that the guaranteed money became an issue. Cam Sutton was more than half of that 3-year contract guaranteed from Detroit, 25, I think, million of the 33 it was. That's a lot. That's more than the Steelers are usually comfortable doing. And then I think it's a little bit fortuitous that there's a guy like Patrick Peterson there that does check a lot of those boxes. Maybe not exactly the same player, but certainly in terms of leadership. You know what Steelers move that it really does remind me of is when they signed Flozell Adams, right? Like they didn't want to have a hole at tackle, but then they did, and they're like, you know what, this guy can still play. And I'll say on top of that, I think that Peterson's game, while maybe not necessarily at his peak, compares to his peers at the position a lot more favorably than Adams did at that time. You know, I think he was one of the, if you look, I mean, PFF coverage ratings, guys that played 80% of snaps, he was 4th in the entire league. Like, he should have been a Pro Bowl corner this year. I feel like he got snubbed. Like, he had a really, really good season. So it's not just an old guy that's a leader that can show young guys the ropes, and you kind of hope that he gets replaced sooner rather than later. It's kind of the best of both worlds of a guy who's playing really well at a slightly advanced age, and also you hope can bring all that intangible stuff too.
I'm right with you. I think that there is a skill level here that he is bringing to the table, Alan. I think that, like you said, this past year, it wasn't like he was just the old guy that was just hanging around. Like Joe Hayden, his last year for the Steelers wasn't a terrible cornerback, but you see he couldn't play that position anymore. It was just not something that he was going to be able to put together consistently for the Steelers, which is why they let him go, and he's still, hasn't found a job since. But Patrick Peterson, part of his forte and part of Joe Hayden's thing was he was never a supreme athlete. He didn't run a great 40. He was just super technical.
Never that really healthy either.
And not healthy either. Patrick Peterson was that super athlete. He may not be as fast as he once was, but I think that's something that he's carrying. He carries a little more gas in his tank at this stage of his career than maybe Joe Hayden did when he was at the end of his stint with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that's a big factor in this. I wanted to bring in our friend Luke Braun, who runs the Locked On Vikings podcast, and he immediately tweeted at me and was like, Chris, don't buy into the age narrative. This guy is for real. Vikings fans are ticked that he's gone. Here's Luke Braun from Locked On Vikings with his perspective on Patrick Peterson.
Hey, what's up, Christopher? It's Luke Braun here from Locked On Vikings. Been watching Patrick Peterson for the last couple years, and here is the lowdown on him now. Forget everything he was in Arizona, where he was a man coverage, lock a guy down, shadow corner. He's not that guy anymore. He is not really suited for pure man coverage anymore. He got burned by Isaiah Hodgins in New York in 2 games last year. But if you put him in quarters, put him in a zone, let him play man outside and deep, let him play in a cover 3, give him at least some part of his range that he doesn't have to cover, whether it's inside help or deep help or whatever, and he'll be able to really cook. His film study led to a lot of interceptions. He plays really smart and breaks on things really early. It makes up for some of that lost speed in his old age. Dude's definitely still got something in the tank. You guys should be excited to get Patrick Peterson. Plus, all that veteran leadership, that is worth, I think, a lot more than people give it credit for. So go enjoy him.
There you have it. Luke Braun giving you the rundown here. And kind of what we're saying here, like, he may not be the Patrick Peterson of old that could just shut down guys, but he's still going to be very useful. And his ability to make plays on the ball in this defense where they just led the NFL in interceptions, I think is huge for what Terrell Austin is trying to do as defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really what we're seeing as the NFL kind of moves into the sort of next phase of this offense-defense struggle, is that it's almost impossible to lock people up for a full game as a defense, especially people with talented receivers and good quarterbacks. Like, you're not going to shut down the Mahomeses and the Allens of the world, the Burrows and those guys. You got to turn them over. You got to turn them over to win. I think that's, especially if you don't have as good of an offense as they do, you have to turn them over. I feel like that has become an even more important part of defensive football, just because, keeping people out of the end zone is no longer realistic. So you've got to get those turnovers. And I think he's made an incredible adjustment as his career has gone on. Obviously he was a big interception guy early in his career in Arizona, but then he kind of went on this, maybe a bit of a downswing in that regard where he was not. And then to have 5 interceptions last year, that's incredible. I mean, one of the best in the NFL, 15 passes defended. To me, like, that's a guy who's always around the ball. And you put that guy next to Minkah Fitzpatrick, I don't know if I'm a quarterback. I just might skip that whole side of the field. Like that's scary for a lot of people.
I want to talk about the trajectory that this leads to for the Pittsburgh Steelers and what the plan might be after this. Also, other positions that need to be addressed in free agency. We'll do all of that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, so don't go anywhere. But first, before we do any of that, we got to talk to you guys about our great sponsors at FanDuel. FanDuel, of course, the #1 sports book in America. And with the NBA season still back in the swing of things, this is your chance to go make some money with FanDuel. And right now, new customers get the no-sweat first bet that gives you up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if you don't win on your first bet. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on anything from the money line to point scores to how many three-pointers get drained. And FanDuel lets you make player prop bets that gives you so many options to win. Also, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same-game parlays. So don't miss out the chance to get on the no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, I'd like to talk to you more about this Patrick Peterson situation. We could talk about him as a player until we're blue in the face, but what does this do for the Steelers roster right now? Because you and I talked about Cameron Sutton, being a priority for the Steelers, obviously, but we also talked about how deep this cornerback class is. Does this guarantee you in your mind that the Steelers are taking a corner with their top 3 picks, 1 in the first round, 2 in the second?
It doesn't, actually.
It doesn't? Whoa.
No. I mean, I think they're in a pretty good place with you put Patrick Peterson on one side, you put Levi Wallace on the other. I think Akella Witherspoon is a guy that they are going to keep around and have some hopes that he can return to the form that he had before he got hurt last year. I question whether they have another coverage slot guy, that role that Cam Sutton started out, that dime slot cover guy, they probably need one of those. Those guys are usually around. You can find, and this is such a deep corner class. Like, I think it could come early, but I don't think it has to either. There are corners all over this draft that could be a dime corner. Like, if that's what you're down to looking for, guys like, Hodges Tomlinson from TCU, Clark Phillips from Utah, some of those guys that measured up a little bit short, like, they're 3rd or 4th round picks in this draft. I think if that's all you need, that's probably where you can go find it. Now, that doesn't mean if Christian Gonzalez is there at 17 that they're going to turn up their nose at him, because I don't think they'll do that either. But I don't think they need a corner based on what's transpired today.
That's interesting, because I feel like this would be the prime chance to go get that corner. And then if he's a starter, yay. If he's not, no pressure. And Patrick Peterson and Levi Wallace and maybe Akella Witherspoon and those guys can hold down the fort. Maybe you bring back James Pierre as well in that mix. And that way there's no pressure on that guy to be the starter right away. But like, again, and maybe you're right. Maybe it's about they have the opportunity to be patient here. But I look at that opportunity for Patrick Peterson to work with a young guy. And then again, if you hit it cornerback and that guy becomes a stud, then your secondary could be terrifying with the idea of Minkah Fitzpatrick, with the Patrick Peterson, with a rookie who's playing really well, and would have all those veterans on his side to say, hey, young rook, whenever you make a mistake, keep your head up, play the system. We got your back. And I think that could be such a good situation. But you are right. This is a deep cornerback class. You can get it anywhere, and they have plenty of other needs. It's not like cornerback has to be the pick, and you've talked about that all offseason long.
I think that's where it really does for me, is that it moves corner from a place where they need one to a place where they could take one, and I feel the same way about like tackle and wide receiver. Like, they don't need one, but they could draft one if the right guy's there in the right position. But now I think there are places where there are bigger needs. And, as we see the way the free agency class goes and the Steelers just making one move here on the first day, I think, to me, linebacker moves up the board for me more than corner does based on today's results. Defensive tackle moves up the board more than corner does based on today's results, because those are places where, unlike guys like Levi Wallace and Akella Witherspoon, who maybe nobody is super excited about running out there, but has done that job in the past, the Steelers don't have those at those positions. Safety is another one. So I think maybe you're seeing, to me, I would say those positions, based on what happened today, moved up for me more than corner did, where it now becomes a position where if it's the right fit, yeah, let's do it. It's definitely still a future need. None of those guys are signed beyond this coming season, except for now Peterson. So it's certainly a long-term need at the position, but maybe not something where it's a super pressing thing for me anymore.
I feel you on that. Let's talk about that linebacker class. You've been tweeting about that all Monday. Yes, I'm trying to not get my days mixed up. Also, for those who are watching on YouTube, I am once again in a different setting. I'm now in Dayton, Ohio. If you've been following along, when Cameron Sutton was signed by the Lions, I was getting lunch in Columbus, Ohio, on the way out here to cover the Pitt Panthers as they get ready to take on Mississippi State. I stopped in Columbus, shot a quick video, put that up on YouTube. As soon as I got into Dayton, the Steelers signed Patrick Peterson, shot another video, went to practice, covered that, wrote that for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Now I'm here doing this after I've already written that story. So it's been a busy time, and I'm in this hotel room for another few days. And if Pitt wins, I'm on my way back to Greensboro. So it's a lot of craziness here. But on top of the craziness, we talk about March Madness for the NCAA tournament. It's March Madness every time NFL free agency rolls around. And we've seen some linebacker signings. Alan, who is off the board and who is the left that you look at? If you're the Steelers, you have to keep have an eye on right now.
Really, there's a lot of linebackers. And it's a huge linebacker free agency class. Like, probably the deepest position in this free agency class was off-ball linebacker. But there are a lot of them that went today, right? Matt Milano re-signed with the Buffalo Bills. David Long went to Miami from Tennessee. Raekwon McMillan re-signed with New England. Quincy Williams re-signed with the Jets. You had Jermaine Pratt re-signed with the Bengals. So a lot of teams locking up their own guys. We saw late in the day Eddie Kendricks go to the Los Angeles Chargers. It seems like over and over again all day long. Alex Singleton re-signed with the Denver Broncos. Like, it was just, that was the theme of the whole day was, there's another linebacker. There's another linebacker. And then, of course, the big one, Tremaine Edmonds, leaves the Buffalo Bills on a ridiculous contract to go to the Chicago Bears, who also had already gotten TJ Edwards. So, I mean, I don't know. How many guys I named? 10 right there. There are still some out there. Okay. It's not like it's the end of the world, including some really good ones. Lamonte David, probably the best one. Bobby Wagner still out there. Maybe some guys I think a little bit more realistic for the Steelers, like Leighton Vander Esch from Dallas. There are still linebackers out there if the Steelers want one, but it definitely became a noticeable trend that that's a position that was going pretty hard today, and that a lot of the top guys are now off the board.
Do you think that's because the NFL draft class isn't that strong at linebacker, at least perceived not to be?
I mean, I definitely think that's part of it, for sure. I also think like some teams just did some dumb stuff, and it was a lot of teams locking up their own guys. Like, but I don't know what the Bears are thinking, spending $91 million on linebacker when, I mean, they weren't any worse with Roquan Smith than they were without him last year. Right. They should have learned this lesson. But I think, the really encouraging thing from the Steelers' perspective about them is that other than that Edmonds deal, almost all those guys signed very reasonable contracts. So I feel like if the Steelers find a guy that they think can fit, they can probably get this done within their budgetary constraints. And of course, they really don't have that much money to spend on free agency. Already dropped about $7 million a year at corner. Probably not going to want to spend a lot more than that at linebacker. Still have safety and defensive tackle to worry about. So they weren't going to be at the top of the market, and I think everybody knew that. But if they're not going to be able to sit around and wait forever to find bargains either, they're going to have to find somebody and get a deal done if they want to make sure they get one here in this next couple of days.
I want to talk more about what they can do there and what more moves they could maneuver to create these opportunities, because this is NFL free agency and it is crazy. We'll talk about all that in just a minute. But first, I'd like to talk to you guys about Built Bar, the number one protein bar out there in America, because it tastes like a candy bar without giving you the the unhealthiness of a candy bar. That's what Built Bar is about. You don't get any of the fat, any of the calories, but you get all of the taste. They're covered in 100% real chocolate, and they come in so many different flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, double chocolate brownie, coconut almond, and so many more. All these flavors, and they only pack 130 calories. They only pack 4 grams of sugar, but somehow they fit 17 grams of protein into every Built Bar. Don't wait to get around and get a box anymore. You can go right to your local Sam's Club or Walmart today to pick up a box of Built Bars. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart, and you can go to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. They have 4-bar boxes of cookies and cream, double chocolate, and coconut puffs. And if you're close to a Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box of hit flavors like brownie batter and churro. Trust me, when you try Built Bars, you'll thank me later, because Built Bars are the #1 protein bar in America. They taste like a candy bar, and they're healthy for you too. Go get some Built Bars today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, looking again at this situation, we're talking about free agency. What do the Steelers need to do to create this space? Because they did the big thing that we all knew was coming. They let go of William Jackson III. They had about $10 million in cap space after that was done. Now that they've signed Patrick Peterson, they're probably a little under like $3 million or something like that as far as cap space. We still got to wait for the official, all the numbers that come in with the move to get Patrick Peterson. But what else do they need to do right now? Do they need to restructure contracts next, or do they need to be aggressive, or do you see them just needing to kind of wait it out and wait for who's kind of sitting around there? Because like we're seeing, people are spending buku money, as they do every year, on free agency.
Yeah, I think the Steelers probably don't need to cut anybody else unless they want to. They can get by with just restructuring contracts. There's a couple guys that if they're going to keep, they should probably extend. To me, like Mitch Trubisky and Miles Jack are the two that really stand out to me, guys that are in the last year of their contract. Elevated cap hits compared to their role in their play for last year. So if they could find a way to knock those down a little bit, that would be helpful. But, I mean, they can save a lot of money with contract restructures. TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Cam Hayward, Deontay Johnson. Like there's 4 big contracts. They can move a lot of money, $20-30 million into the future if they need to make room for them to do business without having to get drastic and start to make cuts. Now, the TJ and Minkah moves are pretty painless. Those guys actually have like a bit of a peak built into their contract where, on a percentage of the salary cap basis, they're actually expected to count far more this year than they will in those future years that you're pushing that money towards. You're kind of smoothing the effect of their contract out when you do that. Hayward and Johnson, though, because they have shorter contracts, you're kind of building a peak where you're putting a season where Deontay Johnson counts $18 million, or Cam Hayward might be thinking about retirement and costing $20 million against the cap, and you can put yourself in a future negative situation. But I think the TJ and Minkah ones are pretty much no-brainers that'll absolutely happen.
I think that those are no-brainers that are there. What do you see as the next play? Do the Steelers go linebacker? Do the Steelers go defensive line? I've been big on the Azeez Al-Shaair move. I like Leighton Vander Esch. I liked him when he was coming out of Boise State. Granted, he was a first-round pick back then. I don't think either of those guys would be expensive. I think Omar Khan, they've gone and gotten Patrick Peterson at a very reasonable price. I think that whereas this kind of move to get an older veteran was not a Kevin Colbert-like move. That you wouldn't see him go get a guy who's about to turn 33 for just a couple of years. But I think the idea of the price range that they're in right now and what it does for their roster and allows them to be a little bit more flexible right now, I think that fits what the Steelers have always tried to do in free agency. Rarely do you see them go out and spend the big buck to get the big guy. They go get guys like Mason Cole and James Daniels like they did last year who are effective but not overpriced in how like Tremaine Edmonds' contract with the Bears was. So in your eyes, what is the next move? Is it a reasonable price linebacker? Is it a person that most Steelers fans are going to be like, who is that? Or is there another big move coming?
To me, I think one of the moves, and I've said this before, needs to be re-signing Terrell Edmonds. I really don't.
You have said that, yes, a lot.
Know what they're waiting for. Let's make that happen. Like just the way he plays with Minkah alone to me is worth it to keep that guy compared to maybe a slightly similarly priced free agent that you could bring in from somewhere else. The safeties did not go today like the linebackers did. Was late in the day until Jesse Bates signed, and I thought that was going to be the first shoe to drop there, and then we'll kind of trickle down. So maybe they're just being patient and smartly patient. But I think that's a move that just makes too much sense to not get done. He deserves a long-term contract. Let's make it happen. Linebacker, a couple guys I really like still out there. Kazir White from Philadelphia, a guy that Andy Weidel drafted and developed, and Drew Tranquil from LA. If the Steelers really are serious about wanting a 3-down linebacker, someone that can cover, to me, he's that coverage guy that's left out there that could really be that player that maybe they had always wanted Devin Bush to be, but he never really was able to reach that potential. I think that's a guy that could be out there. Defensive tackle, I don't know. I'm starting to think it may not happen, or maybe Larry Ogunjobi comes back, or maybe they'll just wait and try to find another Larry Ogunjobi if they kick the can down the road until summertime. But it just doesn't seem like there are a lot of those guys out there. A bunch of them that were out there got snapped up today. Maybe we'll see guys like Kyle Van Ness and Brian Brzee move up the draft board as a result if they don't get one. But to me, I think linebacker, there's some obvious options out there, and Terrell Edmunds is a real no-brainer to me. If you're asking me, like, what do I expect them to do tomorrow, to me that'd be like 1A and 1B.
I think that'd be very interesting. Terrell Edmunds and DeMonte KZ, I think, would be reasonably priced guys because they're not going to command anything. It is my opinion that Terrell Edmunds, the only reason he's not signed right now is because he's looking to get paid. And he's trying to see, well, is there an NFL team out there that will give him the kind of bag that he thinks he deserves? And frankly, I think that he's a very good, useful player. He just doesn't create turnovers. And safety is a position that we've seen in free agency does not get paid that well unless you're a top flight guy like a Jesse Bates type of player. But I can remember over the years, just several guys that were like decent safeties who were good veterans in the NFL, like Trey Boston, and he would just sit there in free agency for months and no one would touch him until they got him for a bottom of the barrel deal. And I think that might be where Terrell Edmunds is trying to fish at. I agree with you, though. The Steelers need to come to him, make that kind of a deal. The guy's, 25, 26 years old. You pair him with Minkah Fitzpatrick for the next several years, and that would be your safety tandem. And he wouldn't be too expensive, while Minkah Fitzpatrick's paying is a pretty penny. You could bring back DeMonte KZ, I presume, on a very team-friendly deal because he was team-friendly this past year. I think that if you could do that, you've got Patrick Peterson, you put yourself in a position where you can, as far as the secondary goes, you could wait on that group. You wouldn't have to go get a cornerback or a defensive back right away in this draft class. And if you did, that it would be more so for development in the future. And if they worked out right away, awesome. But I'm right with you. Linebacker, defensive line, maybe even offensive line are still major concerns. What do you think about some of the Rams guys? I have to admit, I have not been as in tune with the rest of the NFL and free agency because I was driving to Dayton, Ohio for pit practice, and then I was covering the pit practice and doing all this stuff. I believe Ashawn Robinson, and then there was I forget the other guy's name, Greg something. But the two of them were two guys that I thought could be interesting as far as the Steelers, as far as bringing in a guy who didn't cost as much. Are there any other defensive line prospects that you see on the market that makes sense?
Yeah, Greg Gaines is the other Rams defensive tackle. Ashawn Robinson is actually interesting because he kind of profiles as a guy that might be able to play the nose, and the Steelers have obviously been looking for one of those. I actually met Ashawn Robinson at the Steelers facility when he came for a pre-draft top 30 visit. I was there covering Pitt for something, and he came wandering in to check out the indoor facility. Must have been a spring practice. That's about this time of year. So there was some pre-draft interest in Ashawn Robinson. So I think that could be a fit for them if they're looking for someone that could be a nose tackle. Absolutely. It is not a big name defensive tackle class, though. Like here, I'm gonna read a bunch of names, and most of the audience is just gonna, guys like that. Jerry Tillery, and Jared Reed from Green Bay, Poona Ford from Seattle, Morgan Cox from the Los Angeles Chargers, Sheldon Rankin from the New York Jets. These are guys that are out there. They're much in the Larry Ogunjobi mode where they could get some stuff done, but they are not star players. I don't see a star player happening here. I think the Steelers will be lucky to get someone that can just man the spot and do a professional job of it if they're able to do that.
Interesting. I do wonder if that's what the Steelers even want right now, because Chris Wormley's also in free agency right now. As far as the guy they sign again, I think that just having veterans along that line would help with Cam Hayward and DeMarvin Leal.
And hey, let's talk about Calais Campbell. Right, gets cut by the Ravens.
Man,
I mean that would be like the oldest pair of defensive tackles in the league. Sorry, ever. Cam. Like that'd be some old guys. But I love his game. And
he was still fantabulous last year.
If you ever heard Mike Tomlin talk about Calais Campbell,
he loves
Mike Tomlin loves his game too. And he would be a perfect fit for the Steelers defense. I don't know, just throwing it out there.
I think that maybe if they could afford him, I just feel like Calais Campbell, with the age that he's at and the production he's still able to provide, someone that's like a team that has money and thinks, oh, this is our year, they could spend the big bag on him and he might get that kind of a payday. But I do agree. I mean, I also want to point out, if it wasn't for Calais Campbell, the Steelers might have made the playoffs last year, because remember, he
single-handedly up, one hand kept the Steelers out of the
field goal in that game. And if Chris Boswell, or wait, was that Chris Boswell? I forget if that was.
Yeah, that was Bos.
If Chris Boswell makes that field goal, they maybe win that Ravens game. They make enough to make to the playoffs, and maybe we're talking about a whole different scenario. They're drafting somewhere else. Who knows what happens there? But point being, Calais Campbell, I'd be intrigued if he didn't cost a pretty penny to get, because, again, he is up there in age. He'd be a one-year deal type of guy. But, man, Calais Campbell, that guy played against the Steelers in Super Bowl 43. That's how old he is. It's crazy to think about that, Alan.
Yeah, and I actually did. So this is an off-season article that I've been working on, SteelersNow.com, all the off-season coverage there. But a long-term off-season project I've been working on is about aging defensive linemen and how what Cam Hayward has done has been sort of unprecedented as far as guys that have continued to get better and continued to play at a really high level at his age and mileage. And the only guy I have a whole like sort of spaghetti chart where you can track guys' progress through their careers. The only guy with a curve like Cam Hayward's on the whole chart goes back like a decade of NFL defensive tackles is Calais Campbell.
Whoa. Did Alan Saunders just do the thing on the Locked On Steelers podcast? Did he just shoot his shot? Did he just pull up from half court, logo shot, and nothing but net? We'll find out as free agency continues. Alan, thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. This is always happy to have you on. It's always awesome to have you on. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, at @asaunders_PGH on Twitter, SteelersNow.com. At some point, I will finish that big project, probably in the middle of summer when nothing else is going on, about Cam Hayward and how he's a big unicorn when it comes to defensive linemen and their age. And, I mean, all kinds of first day of free agency coverage there, Steelers and all around the NFL. So check it out.
Check it out. SteelersNow.com does a great job. I'm your host, Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can also read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com, where I'm covering all things Pitt athletics, including Pitt's chance in the big dance in the NCAA tournament. They take on Mississippi State 9:10 p.m. Eastern here in Dayton, Ohio. I'll be there covering with Noah Hiles. You can get all that coverage there. But as always, you can find all of our daily coverage of the Locked On of the Steelers from the Locked On Steelers podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. Thanks for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Back tomorrow with more news on your Pittsburgh Steelers and the March Madness that is NFL free agency.